My son told a room full of strangers that I was too confused to understand what was happening. Then he asked security to remove me. I was 74 years old, standing inside the Belmere City Council chamber, watching two uniformed guards walk down the aisle toward me while my son remained behind a microphone at the front of the room. Behind him was a 40-foot projection of the Bellrose Theatre. My theater. The building my wife and I had spent 35 years restoring. Except the picture on the screen was not really the Bellrose. It was an architect's rendering of what would replace most of it. A 12-story hotel. Luxury apartments. A glass lobby. An underground garage. The original theater entrance would remain because the developer called it heritage preservation. Everything behind that entrance would be demolished. I had learned that part 17 minutes earlier. My son, Evan, had apparently known for 11 months. "Dad," he said from the microphone, "please don't make this worse." I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because there are moments when anger cannot find enough room inside your chest, so it comes out wearing another expression. "You're selling the Bellrose. I am trying to save what can be saved. You're knocking down the auditorium. The building cannot survive as it is. You told the planning commission I approved this." Evan looked at the chairman. Then at the guards. "My father delegated management authority to me 2 years ago," he said. "He has recently had difficulty remembering some of those decisions." The room became very quiet. There are insults that make you angry. And there are insults that rearrange the way you understand the person who said them. That sentence did the second. One of the guards reached my row. "Sir, let's step outside." Then a woman near the clerk's desk spoke. "Wait." Everyone turned. Her name was Monica Ruiz. She had been the city clerk for perhaps 5 years. I knew her well enough to say hello and not well enough to know why she was holding a yellow folder with my wife's handwriting on the front. Monica looked at the planning chairman. "I don't think Mr. Calder should leave yet." Evan's face changed. "What is that?" Monica opened the folder. A preservation covenant recorded against the Bellrose Theatre property in May of 2001. I frowned. "A what?" She looked at me. "It was signed by you and your wife, Margaret Calder." The mention of Margaret's name hit me harder than I expected. She had been dead 3 years. Monica continued. "It appears the covenant restricts demolition of the auditorium or conversion away from public performing arts use without approval from the Bellrose Arts Trust." The developer's attorney stood. "That restriction expired?" "No," Monica said. She lifted a second document. Mrs. Calder filed a renewal in 2016. Evan stepped away from the microphone. "That's impossible." Monica read for another few seconds. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "The successor trustees are Evan Calder and Claire Calder Bennett. Any demolition approval requires both signatures." The entire chamber turned toward my son. I did too. Because Claire was his sister. My daughter. And she had not stepped inside the Bellrose Theatre in 8 years. She had not spoken to Evan in almost 7. More importantly, she had once told me that the Bellrose would destroy our family if I kept confusing ownership with love. I told her she was being dramatic. Then she left. The guards did not remove me that night. The Planning Commission postponed the hearing. Harrogate Hospitality's attorneys asked for time to examine the covenant. Evan refused to look at me. And I went home with 3 questions. Why had my wife renewed a legal restriction without telling me? Why had my son tried to sell our theater without telling his sister? And why had he been willing to tell a public meeting that I could no longer trust my own memory? By the end of the week, I would know the answer to all three. I would also learn that Bellrose owed more than $7 million. That Evan had mortgaged his own house to keep it operating. That 22 employees could lose their jobs. And that Harrogate had promised my son more than $1 million if he delivered the property without delay. But the most painful discovery was not hidden in a contract. It was something my daughter had tried to tell me 8 years earlier. I simply had not respected her enough to listen. My name is Thomas Calder. The Bellrose Theatre was not built by my family. That distinction matters. For most of my life, I spoke about the building as though the Calder family had raised it brick by brick. We did not. The Bellrose opened in 1928 with 1,200 seats, painted ceilings, carved walnut railings, red velvet curtains and enough plaster decoration to make every repair cost twice what a sensible building would cost. By 1989, it was almost abandoned. The roof leaked. The heating barely worked. Half the balcony was closed. The former owner wanted to turn it into warehouse space. I was 37. Margaret was 35. We had 2 children, a mortgage we could barely afford and absolutely no business purchasing a dying theater. So naturally, we bought it. I had worked in event production. Margaret ran arts programs for the county. I knew lights, stage crews, ticketing and the dangerous confidence of people who think enthusiasm qualifies as financing. Margaret knew almost everything useful. She built relationships with schools, senior groups, dance companies, local businesses, city officials. I gave interviews. Margaret made sure there was something worth interviewing me about. We restored the Bellrose one section at a time. The lobby first. Then the stage. Then dressing rooms. Then half the balcony. People donated money. Carpenters donated weekends. A local electrician donated labor. A retired painter spent 4 years restoring sections of the ceiling because, according to him, retirement had revealed that his wife did not need him inside the house 7 days a week. The Bellrose reopened fully in 1995. By then, I had begun calling it the theater our family saved. Margaret always corrected me. The town saved it, she would say. I thought she was being modest. Years later, I understood she was being precise. Our children grew up backstage. Evan was practical from the beginning. At 12, he asked why intermission lasted 20 minutes when concessions made most of their money in 14. At 17, he reorganized our volunteer schedule because, in his words, adults should not need 3 meetings to decide who hands out programs. Claire was different. She loved the part of theater that could not be measured easily. Children standing taller after their first performance. Older people laughing at a comedy they had almost decided not to attend. Teenagers finding friends in rehearsal rooms. When she was 15, Claire started a Saturday drama class for children whose families could not afford private lessons. Margaret gave her a classroom. I gave her rules. That difference would eventually describe most of our relationship. Evan stayed in Belmere. He studied business administration, came back and joined the Bellrose full-time. Claire studied arts education. She returned too. For almost 12 years, all 4 of us worked in the same building. People thought we were lucky. We thought we were lucky. Margaret knew better. The morning after the planning hearing, Evan came to my house at 7:20. I saw his car through the front window. I considered not opening the door. Then I remembered I was 74 and decided dramatic door games belonged to younger people. I let him in. He had not slept. Neither had I. "You embarrassed me," I said. Evan removed his coat. "You stopped a public hearing by shouting from the audience. You told them I was confused. You were confused." I stared at him. He corrected himself. "About the project." "Because you did not tell me about the project." "I did." "No. You told me Harrogate was exploring a partnership. You said they wanted to put a hotel on the parking property. That was the original plan. It changed. You forgot to mention the demolition part. You stopped coming to project meetings. I retired from daily management. I did not retire from owning the building." Evan rubbed his face. "Dad, this is exactly why I didn't want last night to happen." "Because I might object?" "Because you object before understanding." "And you solve that by telling people I cannot remember things?" He hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than if he had answered immediately. "I shouldn't have said it that way." "You should not have said it at all. You have forgotten meetings. Everyone forgets meetings. You signed the Harrogate Exploration Resolution. Exploration. Not demolition. You approved giving me negotiating authority. I did not approve you telling the city I was incompetent." Evan looked at the floor. "I needed the hearing to stay on schedule." "Why?" He did not answer. "Why, Evan?" He reached into his bag and placed a financial statement on my kitchen table. "Because we have 11 weeks. Until what?" "Until the Bellrose runs out of money." I looked at him. He opened the statement. Our operating line was almost fully drawn. Insurance premiums had increased. Ticket sales had recovered after the pandemic, but not enough. Touring productions cost more. Utilities cost more. Maintenance costs had become absurd. The Bellrose carried $3.8 million in loans. Another $3.4 million in deferred building work had been identified. Roofing. Heating. Electrical modernization. Accessibility work. Stage systems. Exterior masonry. I looked at the total. $7.2 million. What happened? Evan laughed. It sounded exactly like my laugh from the council chamber. 35 years happened. Why did you let it get this bad? The moment the sentence left my mouth, I saw his expression change. I should have stopped. I did not. You've been executive director for 7 years. Evan stood. Yes. 7 years. Do you know what you did 6 years ago when I asked to replace the heating system? I don't remember. You said the audience does not buy tickets because the boiler is modern. He turned another page. 5 years ago, I asked to close the balcony for 6 months and repair structural damage. You said closing 400 seats would make us look like we were failing. I don't remember saying that. I do. He opened another document. 4 years ago, the Marston Foundation offered $2 million toward accessibility upgrades if we created an independent facilities board. You refused. They wanted control. They wanted oversight. Evan looked at me. You have always called oversight control when it belongs to somebody else. That sentence followed me for the rest of the story. At the time, I hated him for saying it. Then he showed me a number I had not expected. $640,000. It appeared under private loans. Lender: Evan Calder. What is this? My money. You put $600,000 into the Bellrose? 640. Where did you get it? Evan sat again. I refinanced my house. I closed the financial statement. His wife, Dana, loved that house. They had raised my grandchildren there. You never told me. I told you we needed cash. You told me the Christmas season would fix it. Why didn't you tell me it was your house? Because I did not want another speech about how the Calders sacrifice for the Bellrose. Neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, what is Harrogate paying? $19.2 million. For the entire block? Yes. What remains after the debt? Approximately $9 million before taxes and transaction costs. Who gets it? You and Mom's trust own 60%. I own 25%. Claire owns 15%. I stared at him. You were going to send Claire a check after selling a building she didn't know was for sale. I tried to contact her. How? Through her attorney. Why not call your sister? Evan looked at me. You know why? Unfortunately, I did. Claire left the Bellrose 8 years earlier after an argument that became family history before any of us had agreed on what actually happened. The public version was simple. Claire wanted to change things. Evan wanted financial discipline. I sided with Evan. Claire became angry and left. That was the story I told friends. It was technically true. Technical truth is one of the most useful forms of dishonesty. What actually happened began with a proposal Claire had spent 18 months developing. A state university wanted to establish a performing arts education center in Belmere. They would lease 2 floors of the Bellrose Annex for 15 years. They would help renovate classrooms, fund student performances, create internships. A private donor had offered $3 million to create an endowment for youth programs. The condition was that the educational programs be overseen by an independent non-profit board rather than the Calder family. Claire thought it was the future. I thought it was the beginning of losing the Bellrose. At the board meeting, she presented for almost an hour. When she finished, I asked, "So after all we built, you want strangers deciding what happens in our own theater?" Claire answered, "I want qualified people helping us run something the whole community paid to restore." I remember becoming angry. I remember telling her she was confusing ideals with responsibility. I remember Evan saying we could not promise building access for 15 years without understanding future commercial opportunities. And I remember saying a sentence I would eventually regret more than almost anything else I had said as a father. I told Claire, "Your brother understands what keeps the doors open. You understand what happens after they open." I thought I was describing their strengths. Claire heard what I had actually said. Her brother understood the business. She understood the decoration. 2 months later, the university partnership died. The donor withdrew the endowment. Claire resigned. Margaret begged her to stay. Evan told her she was overreacting. I told her the Bellrose would always be here when she was ready to come back. Claire looked directly at me. "That is the problem, Dad. You think everything will always be here waiting for everyone else to return to your version of it." She left. The Bellrose stayed. And I took that as proof that I had been right. At 10:30 the morning after the hearing, I called my daughter. Claire answered with, "Are you in the hospital?" "No." "Is Evan?" "No." "Then this is unexpected. I deserved that." "Did the city contact you?" There was a pause. "Yes." "About the Bellrose government?" "Yes." "Did you know it existed?" "No." That surprised me. "You're named as trustee. So I'm told." "Your mother renewed it." Claire became quiet. "Then. That sounds like Mom." "Apparently Evan needs your signature. He won't get it." She answered so quickly that I almost laughed. "You don't even know the deal. He wants to demolish the auditorium." "How do you know?" "Because unlike this family, city planning documents are public." Another deserved answer. "Claire, I need you to come to Belmere." "No." "Please." Silence. I realized I had almost never used that word with my daughter without attaching instructions afterward. "Please come home. Please calm down. Please think about your mother. Please do not make this public." This time I stopped after "please." Claire noticed. "I can come Friday." "Thank you. I am not coming to save the theater." "I understand." "No, Dad." Her voice softened. "I need you to understand that I might decide it should be sold." I looked at the financial statement on my kitchen table. "For the first time in my life," I said, "I think I can understand that." Friday morning brought the next problem. A city building inspector closed the Bellrose balcony. Not the whole theater. Just 412 seats. Temporary closure pending repairs. Evan called me from the theater. "You wanted time. Time costs $22,000 a week now. Can we move performances?" "Some. Not the touring shows." "What about repairs?" "Initial estimate is $900,000. I sat down. "Does Harrogate know?" "Yes." "Does it change their offer?" "No." Of course it did not. They planned to demolish the balcony anyway. Claire arrived that afternoon. I waited outside the Bellrose. She stepped out of a blue rental car with a laptop bag and a small suitcase. She was 43. Her hair had more gray than I remembered. She wore glasses now. She looked like Margaret around the eyes. For a second, I forgot 8 years. Then Claire saw the building. She stopped. Her face changed in a way that told me leaving something does not necessarily make you stop loving it. "You kept the old poster cases. Your mother wouldn't let me replace them." She was right. Usually. Claire looked at me. "Do not make Mom the neutral referee now that she can't disagree with you." That took less than 2 minutes. We were clearly still family. Evan met us in the lobby. The brother and sister had not been in the same room for almost 6 years. Claire. Evan. No hug. No handshake. Not even anger. Anger would have implied more recent practice. We went upstairs to Margaret's old office. Evan had kept most of it unchanged. Claire noticed. She did not comment. For 2 hours, Evan explained the finances. Claire asked better questions than I did. She had spent the previous 8 years running Open Door Arts, a non-profit network operating theater programs in 6 cities. I had attended one fundraiser. I told people my daughter ran children's theater programs. It turned out she managed an organization with a $9 million annual budget. There are many ways to underestimate a child. Mine had become sophisticated. Claire examined the debt schedule. Why is the building still securing operating loans? Evan answered. Because donors fund programs. Banks fund boilers. Where's the capital reserve? Gone. When? Pandemic closure. Claire looked at me. You knew that? I knew we used reserves. Did you know they were gone? No. Evan leaned back. He knew when we had fundraising events. He knew when we sold out. He knew when the governor visited. Dad stopped asking what the bank balance was before I became executive director. I wanted to argue. Claire saved me the embarrassment. He did that before you became executive director. Evan almost smiled. For one brief second, they were allies again. Against me. It was oddly comforting. Then Claire asked, "What do you get from Harrogate?" Evan became still. I looked at him. What does she mean? Claire turned her laptop. Harrogate had filed several exhibits with the Planning Commission. One referenced an executive transition agreement. Evan closed his eyes briefly. I was going to disclose it. When? Claire asked. After closing? What agreement? I said. Evan opened another file. Harrogate planned to hire him for 3 years as Cultural Development Director for the new property and 2 other hospitality projects. Salary. Benefits. Performance compensation. Total potential value. $1.4 million. I felt heat rise into my face. That's why you needed the hearing on schedule. No. Do not lie to me now. I am not. Evan stood. I need the hearing on schedule because the Bellrose is running out of cash. I also negotiated a job because after 23 years working here, I would like to know what happens to me when this place is gone. 22 employees lose their jobs. So I am not allowed to have another one? You hit it. Yes. At least he admitted that. Claire asked. How many people does Harrogate retain? 9. And the others? Severance. How many lose jobs? 22. Claire stared at her brother. You were going to eliminate 22 jobs, take a $1.4 million contract and call Dad confused if he interrupted. Evan's voice sharpened. And you were going to do what? Claire frowned. Do not walk into this building after 8 years and behave like I had a good option. I didn't say you did. You left. The room changed. Evan had been angry with me. Now he was talking to his sister. You left me with him. Claire's face went still. I almost interrupted. Then I remembered the city hearing. I had spent enough years inserting myself between my children and calling it parenting. Claire said. You were 40. I did not abandon you at daycare. You walked away from the Bellrose because Dad rejected one proposal. No. I walked away because every proposal eventually became a referendum on whether I respected Dad. You could have stayed and fought. I did. For 12 years. Claire looked at him. You learned how to survive Dad by becoming useful to him. I learned by leaving. Evan looked toward the window. Claire softened. I know you carried things I didn't. Do you? Yes. But carrying something does not make it yours. Nobody spoke. Margaret would have known what to say. That thought arrived automatically. Then I stopped myself. Margaret was gone. We were going to have to learn how to speak without borrowing her wisdom. The next rehook came from Harrogate itself. Claire asked to see the full redevelopment drawings. Evan had shown us the renderings used at the public hearing. Beautiful facade. Restored marquee. Historic photographs. A ballroom named after Margaret. Claire wanted construction plans. Evan hesitated. Then he opened them. The ballroom did not preserve the stage. The stage would be removed completely. The auditorium floor would be leveled. The balcony removed. Most interior ornament covered or relocated. Harrogate planned to preserve the lobby, ticket windows, facade and approximately 40 feet of the original entrance hall. Everything else became hotel space. Claire closed the file. They're not preserving a theater. They're preserving evidence that a theater used to be here. I looked at Evan. You knew? Yes. Why did the public renderings show the stage? The image is conceptual. That sounds like their lawyer. It sounds like somebody who has spent 11 months negotiating. Claire asked. Did you ask them to preserve the auditorium? For 6 months. And? They reduced the offer by $8 million if they had to preserve it. Why? Because old theaters are expensive. Evan looked at both of us. That is the part nobody wants to put on a poster. Everyone loves historic buildings until the invoice arrives. He was right. And I hated that too. On Saturday morning, Monica Ruiz invited us to City Hall to examine the covenant. The original agreement was 32 pages. I had signed every page. I remembered almost none of it. The covenant came from a city preservation package approved in 2001. The Bellrose needed major restoration after water damage. Belmira provided grants, tax concessions and public fundraising support worth more than $1 million. In return, Margaret and I agreed the main theater would remain a public performing arts venue. If we ever wanted to demolish it or convert it permanently, the Bellrose Arts Trust had the right to intervene. At the time, Evan and Claire were named future trustees. The restriction lasted 20 years. Then came the renewal. 2016. Margaret's signature. My signature. I stared at it. I signed this? Monica nodded. It's notarized. Claire asked. Do you remember why? No. Evan said nothing. Then Monica found the council minutes from the renewal meeting. Margaret had spoken. Her statement was summarized in the minutes. She said the Bellrose had survived long enough that future generations might someday see the land beneath it as more valuable than the building. The covenant was meant to guarantee that such a decision could not be made by one owner in private. Claire looked at Evan. Neither spoke. I felt strangely betrayed by Margaret. Then I felt ashamed for feeling betrayed. I had signed it. She had not hidden the document from me. I had simply treated another legal agreement as something Margaret understood, so I did not have to. My wife's foresight looked like secrecy only because I had not been paying attention. That afternoon, An email arrived from a retired history professor named Helen Park. She volunteered with the Belmere Historical Archive. She had watched the planning hearing online. Her message said, "I believe I have something the Calder family should see." An hour later, Claire, Evan and I sat in a small archive room watching Margaret on a computer screen. The video was recorded in 2018. 2 years after the covenant renewal. 3 years before Margaret became ill. She looked healthy. I had forgotten how quickly that could hurt. The interview was part of an oral history project about the restoration of downtown Belmere. Margaret talked about volunteers, fundraising, opening night, the children growing up backstage. Then the interviewer asked who owned the Bellrose. Margaret laughed. I knew that laugh. She said, "Legally, my husband and I own most of it. Emotionally, Thomas believes he owns all of it." Claire covered her mouth. Evan smiled. I didn't either. Margaret continued. But the Bellrose only exists because thousands of people gave something. Money, work, tickets, time, patience. So I don't believe any one Calder should ever have the power to erase it by himself. The interviewer asked whether that included her husband. Margaret smiled. Especially my husband. I almost laughed. Then the interviewer asked about Evan and Claire. Margaret's expression changed. She said, "Evan believes responsibility means carrying something until nobody else can take it from you. Claire believes responsibility means building something that doesn't need you forever. They are both useful instincts. They are dangerous when either becomes the only one in the room." Nobody moved. Margaret had been dead 3 years and had still managed to interrupt our argument. Then she said one final thing. "If my family ever tells you preserving the Bellrose means preserving the Calder name above the door, don't believe them. The theater matters more than being ours." The video ended. Evan stared at the blank screen. Claire cried quietly. I sat with my hands folded in my lap. Helen Park gave us privacy. After several minutes, Evan said, "She would hate the hotel." Claire answered, "She might hate bankruptcy more." That was the moment I knew my daughter had not come to Belmere simply to oppose her brother. She had come to make a decision. Even if that decision hurt. The next Monday, Claire presented an alternative. Not a miracle. I appreciated that immediately. She proposed creating an independent non-profit organization to take ownership of the Bellrose performance spaces. The Calder family would surrender control. The adjoining parking property and office annex could be sold separately. The city could pursue preservation funding. The university partnership might be revived in smaller form. Open Door Arts could lease program space for 5 years. The theater would reduce its performance season while repairs were completed in phases. It would be smaller, less glamorous, less profitable. And no Calder would own it. My first instinct was no. That instinct had 74 years of practice. Evan's response was more practical. Where does the money come from? Claire opened a spreadsheet. Potential annex sale. 4.1 million. Parking development rights. 2.3 million. City and state preservation funds. Potentially 1.8. University lease commitment. 1.2 million over 5 years. Foundation campaign. Unknown. Evan leaned back. You're short. I know. By millions. I know. And that assumes the city gives you everything. No. It assumes the city considers it. We have 11 weeks. Then help me. Evan laughed. You want me to help replace my own plan with one that removes me from control? Claire looked at him. Yes. Why would I do that? Because you keep saying this was never about your job. That landed exactly where she intended. Evan stood and left the room. I watched him go. Then I looked at Claire. That was cruel. Yes. You admit it? I've had 8 years to rehearse. She looked toward the door. I probably should have said it differently. That was more apology than our family usually managed before dessert. Evan did not return that afternoon. He returned the next morning with 6 binders. He placed them on the table. If we're going to try Claire's plan, this is what actually needs fixing. Claire looked at him. Are we trying it? No. We're seeing whether it's real. It was not reconciliation. But it was work. Sometimes work is what reconciliation looks like before anyone trusts the word. We created a temporary advisory group. Not a Calder family committee. That was Claire's first condition. 2 employees. A city preservation officer. A university representative. A local accountant. A community member. Claire. Evan. And me. 9 people. 3 Calders. I disliked being a minority in a room attached to my own theater. That was another sign the arrangement had merit. At the first meeting, a lighting technician named Marcus Reed asked the question none of us wanted. If the nonprofit plan fails, how many jobs disappear? Evan answered. All 31 eventually. If Harrogate happens? 22. If Claire's plan works? Claire answered. Probably 6 to 10 positions change or disappear during the first year. Marcus nodded. So nobody has a plan where everyone gets what they want? No, Claire said. Marcus looked around the table. Good. Because I was getting suspicious of everyone who talked like they did. I liked Marcus immediately. 3 weeks passed. The university was interested. Not enough. The city was interested. Also not enough. A preservation foundation offered $700,000 if the theater transferred into independent nonprofit ownership. A local developer offered $4.6 million for the annex and parking rights. We still had a gap. A large one. Evan reminded us every day. Not to undermine the plan. Because the bank balance reminded him every morning. Then Harrogate increased its offer. $21 million. Cash at closing. A slightly larger employee severance package. And a new condition. We had 10 days to accept. Claire called it pressure. Evan called it certainty. I called it $21 million. Old habits remain fluent even after you stop trusting them. On the 4th day of Harrogate's deadline, I met Evan backstage. The Bellrose was empty. Rows of seats disappeared into darkness. I had stood on that stage thousands of times. Opening nights. Fundraisers. School graduations. Memorial concerts. Press conferences. That afternoon, There was nobody to applaud. Evan sat on the edge of the stage. I sat beside him. After a while, I asked, "Do you want Harrogate to win?" He thought before answering. "I want it to end." "What?" "This." He gestured toward the theater. "Do you know what I think about when I wake up? Payroll. Insurance. Ticket projections. A roof leak. A donor who's angry because his name is too small on a plaque. A touring company that wants another 10%. I walk through the lobby and people tell me how lucky I am to carry on the family legacy. They mean it kindly. I hate them for saying it." I looked at my son. I had spent years assuming Evan stayed because he loved the Bellrose more than Claire did. Maybe he stayed because he did not know how to leave. "Why didn't you leave?" "Yes." Evan smiled. "And hand it back to you?" "I was retired." "You were never retired. You stopped answering emails. You did not stop having vetoes." I had no answer. He continued. "When Claire left, you told me I was the one who understood responsibility. I remember. I built my entire life around that sentence." I turned toward him. "Evan. No." He shook his head. "I am not blaming you for everything. That would just be another way to pretend I did not make choices. I chose the Harrogate deal. I hid parts of it. I knew Claire would object. I knew you would object once you understood the demolition. And yes, I wanted the job they offered me." "Because of the money?" "Yes." Then he looked around the theater. "And because the job ended at 5:30. That was when I understood my son." "Not completely. Parents rarely understand children completely. The arrogant ones simply stop noticing the gaps." The following day, Harrogate requested a private meeting with Evan. He invited Claire and me. The developer did not like that. Their attorney explained they believed the 2016 covenant renewal might be challengeable. I had signed it. But according to their argument, the Bellrose corporate board had not separately approved the renewal. They believed a court could decide the covenant did not bind the corporate owner's interest. Claire's attorney disagreed. The city disagreed. Nobody could guarantee what a judge would decide. Then Harrogate's attorney placed a document in front of Evan. It was a declaration. Evan could sign it as executive director. It stated the 2016 renewal was never intended by company management to restrict future redevelopment. That was already uncomfortable. Then I read the next paragraph. It said my participation in the renewal should be given limited weight because I had historically deferred legal and financial matters to Margaret and might not have understood the document's long-term effect. I looked at my son. Harrogate's attorney said, "This is consistent with what was represented at the planning hearing." Evan read the document. Claire said nothing. Neither did I. Evan put down the pen. "No." The attorney frowned. "Evan, this strengthens our position. It says my father did not understand what he signed. You suggested something similar publicly." I was wrong. I did not move. The attorney tried again. "You told the commission he had forgotten decisions." He has forgotten decisions. So have I. That is different. No, Evan said. What is different is that I was angry and needed him out of the room. The attorney closed the folder. Harrogate's offer remained open. But my son's relationship with the developer changed that afternoon. So did mine with him. In the car, I told Evan. "Thank you." He stared through the windshield. "Don't." "Why?" "Because refusing to repeat something I should never have said is not a gift to you." I nodded. He had become wiser than I was at apologizing. That was irritating. We had 6 days left. The non-profit plan was still short $1.7 million. Then Claire discovered the missing piece in the least dramatic place possible. A spreadsheet. She had been reviewing the land separately from the building. Behind the Bellrose sat a narrow strip used for loading and staff parking. We considered it practically worthless on its own. A university planner disagreed. Combined with a neighboring parcel the university already controlled, it could create a pedestrian connection between campus housing and downtown. The university offered a long-term prepaid lease. $1.2 million. We were still short. Then the employee representative asked whether the theater had ever conducted a community capital campaign. I said, "Of course." Claire said, "Not one where the Calders don't control the money." I decided not to argue. A campaign launched 48 hours later. Not Save the Calder Theater. Claire refused that language. The Bellrose had existed 61 years before any Calder arrived. The campaign was called "Keep the Stage." People donated $50, $20, $500, $10. Former students donated. Actors donated. People who had been married on the stage donated. People who had attended one terrible community musical in 1997 donated and included comments identifying exactly how terrible it had been. I read every message. Some praised us. Many criticized us. One woman contributed $30 and wrote, "I have disagreed with Thomas Calder about almost everything since 1994. Please do not let that man be the reason we lose a good theater." I gave another $30 in her honor. In 5 days, the community raised $680,000. A regional foundation matched the final $200,000 if the Calder family surrendered voting control permanently. There it was. The condition I had rejected 8 years earlier. The theater could survive. But not as ours. The night before Harrogatel's deadline, the three of us sat on the Bellrose stage. Just like Evan and I had days earlier. This time Claire sat between us. We had 2 choices. Harrogate. $21 million. Debt gone. 22 jobs lost. Auditorium demolished. Family shareholders paid. Evan's contract preserved. Or the Bellrose Arts Trust. Debt reduced but not eliminated. Construction phased over years. 6 positions likely lost immediately. Several roles reduced. No guarantee fundraising would remain strong. No family control. And none of us would become wealthy from the transaction. Claire looked at me. "You're still the majority owner." "I know. So what do you want?" For most of my life, that question would have been easy. Keep the theater. Keep the name. Keep the family. Keep control. I had spent decades treating those 4 things as though they meant the same thing. They did not. I want the Bellrose to survive. Evan looked at me. That's not an answer. He was right. I tried again. I want the non-profit plan. Claire's eyes filled. Evan stared at the empty seats. After a while, he asked. Even if they take the Calder name off the building? Yes. Even if they do things you hate? Yes. Even if the new board refuses to let you have an office? Now you're enjoying this. Claire laughed. Evan did too. I had missed that sound. Then I asked Evan, "What do you want?" He was quiet for a long time. Finally, "I don't want to run it anymore." Claire looked at him. He continued, "I want the theater to exist. I don't want its existence to be my personality." Claire nodded. "That seems fair." Then Evan looked at her. "What do you want?" Claire smiled sadly. "I want to stop being the daughter who left." Nobody spoke. She looked at me. "And I do not mean I want to come back. I know. I have a life. I know. Do you?" I smiled. "I am learning." The next morning, Evan notified Harrogate that we were rejecting the offer. He lost the $1.4 million employment package. He also lost an executive position he had quietly imagined for almost a year. He never pretended that part did not hurt. I respected him more for saying so. Then we returned to City Hall. The chamber was even more crowded than before. This time, Evan did not stand alone at the microphone. Claire stood beside him. I sat in the audience. Nobody tried to remove me. The planning chairman asked whether Harrogate's application was being withdrawn. Evan said yes. Then he asked to make a statement. He looked toward me. At the previous hearing, I suggested my father was confused and should not participate. The room became quiet. I said that because I was trying to prevent a deal I believed was necessary from being delayed. My father had forgotten some conversations. So had I. I used normal disagreement and normal memory failures to make his objection sound less legitimate. That was wrong. I had spent my life at microphones. I had never been prouder of anything one of my children said into one. Then Claire spoke. She explained the non-profit plan. No dramatic promises. The Bellrose would need years of work. It would reduce programming temporarily. Some staff roles would be lost or changed. The balcony might remain closed for more than a year. But the stage would remain a stage. Then the chairman called my name. I walked to the microphone. The last time I approached it, I was angry that my son had questioned my judgment. This time, I was about to give away the authority I had spent my adult life protecting. My wife and I bought the Bellrose in 1989. I stopped. Then corrected myself. My wife and I bought the deed to the Bellrose in 1989. People looked at me. The building was saved by a lot more people than us. I spent many years understanding that sentence as humility. I understand it now as ownership of a different kind. Not legal ownership. Responsibility. I looked at Claire. My daughter proposed something similar to this 8 years ago. Claire became still. I rejected it because I believed allowing outsiders into governance meant the Calder family had failed. I was wrong. Then I looked at Evan. My son inherited the consequences of that decision and many others. He also made serious mistakes of his own. He tried to solve a public problem with a private deal. And I taught him more about doing that than I would like to admit. Then I announced that I would transfer my controlling interest to the Bellrose Arts Trust if the financing conditions were completed. There was applause. I did not enjoy it. That surprised me. For most of my life, applause had been one of my preferred forms of evidence. That night, it felt unnecessary. The Bellrose Arts Trust took control 4 months later. It was not easy. Real endings are rude that way. 6 positions disappeared during the restructuring. 3 people accepted severance. 2 moved into jobs with the university partnership. 1 left Belmere. The balcony stayed closed for 14 months. The winter season was reduced. A touring musical cancelled because we could not guarantee enough seats. Some donors complained that the new board was too cautious. Other donors complained it spent too much. This reassured me that the organization had achieved normal nonprofit status. The university opened its Performance Education Center in the annex the following year. Claire's organization signed a 5-year program agreement. She did not move back to Belmere. For a while, I was disappointed. Then I realized I had somehow turned my daughter's professional partnership into another test of whether she loved me enough to come home. I stopped. Claire visited. That was enough. Evan resigned as executive director when the trust assumed control. The new board offered him a role. He declined. For 3 months, he did almost nothing. Dana told me he reorganized their garage twice because he did not know what to do with weekends. Eventually, Evan took a management position at a regional convention center. Less prestige. Better hours. No family portraits in the office. He says that last part is worth at least 20% of his salary. Evan and Claire did not become best friends. I used to think reconciliation required a dramatic scene where everybody cried and apologized until the past agreed to stop mattering. That did not happen. Their relationship repaired in smaller pieces. Evan sent Claire a spreadsheet without explaining it because he remembered she knew how to read one. Claire asked Evan for advice about a lease without adding that she was only asking because he was good at contracts. He attended one of her student showcases. She attended his daughter's graduation. They began calling occasionally. Then occasionally became regularly enough that I stopped asking whether they had spoken. That was progress too. My relationship with Claire took longer. 6 months after the trust took over, we sat in a coffee shop near her office. I had driven 3 hours to see her. Halfway through lunch, I told her, "I am sorry about the university proposal." She looked at me. Which part? I had learned to fear that question. All of it. That is not specific. I sighed. You really are your mother's daughter. Claire gave me a look. I corrected myself. You really are Claire. She smiled. Better. So I tried again. I was wrong to treat your proposal like you were trying to take something away from me. I was wrong to trust Evan's business judgment more because it looked like mine. I was wrong when I told you he understood what kept the doors open and you understood what happened after. You understood the Bellrose in ways I did not. And when you left, I turned your absence into proof that you were less committed. Claire stared at her coffee. I needed that 8 years ago. I know. No. She looked up. You know now. It was almost the same thing she had said in another form years earlier. This time I listened. You were right. She nodded. Then she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Not forgiveness. Not completely. But something with enough room for it later. My apology to Evan happened accidentally. We were watching a baseball game at my house. Nothing important was happening. That is where many important family conversations begin. A commercial came on. I said, "I should have asked whether you wanted the Bellrose." Evan looked at me. "What?" "When you came back after college. I assumed you wanted it." "You did want it. At 23. People change." Evan lowered the television volume. I continued. "When your mother died, I told everyone you were carrying on our legacy. You said it a lot. I thought it was praise. It was. It just came with a job description." I nodded. "I am sorry." Evan looked toward the television. Then he said, "I wanted you to be proud of me." I was. I know. That was part of the problem. I thought about that for a long time. We spend so much time talking about children damaged by criticism that we sometimes forget praise can become a cage when it rewards only one version of them. 2 years after the city hearing, the Bellrose reopened its balcony. The trust invited me to opening night. They did not give me a front row seat. I bought one in row G. Seat 17. When I arrived, a young volunteer asked to see my ticket. I showed it to her. She scanned it. Then she said, "Enjoy the show, Mr. Calder." No special entrance. No owner's box. No staff member waiting for my approval. I loved it. The lobby still had the old poster cases. The restored ceiling was brighter. The university had taken over part of the annex. Students filled rooms that had once been used for storage. The theater's name was still Bellrose. Not Calder Bellrose. Not Margaret Calder Performing Arts Center. Just Bellrose. Claire was there. She stood near the stairs speaking with a group of students. Evan arrived 10 minutes later with Dana. He wore jeans. In 23 years at the Bellrose, I was not sure I had ever seen him attend an opening night without a suit and a radio clip to his belt. He looked younger. Not because he was. Because nothing in the building was his emergency anymore. We took our seats. Before the performance, the new executive director walked onto the stage. Her name was Denise Harper. She thanked donors, the university, employees, volunteers, the city. Then she thanked the Calder family for transferring the theater into community ownership. The audience applauded. Claire looked at me. Evan did too. I whispered, "Your mother would have loved this." Claire raised an eyebrow. I caught myself. Then I smiled. "I love this." Claire smiled back. "Much better." The lights went down. For the first time in decades, I sat inside the Bellrose with absolutely no authority over what was about to happen. I could not change the lighting, extend intermission, call backstage, move a donor, adjust the program. All I could do was watch. It turned out watching was enough. During intermission, Evan and I walked into the lobby. A framed photograph of Margaret hung near the original ticket windows. Not a giant portrait. One photograph among dozens showing people who had helped restore the Bellrose. Carpenters, teachers, students, donors, volunteers, actors. Margaret was standing in the middle of the work crew wearing paint-covered overalls. Evan stopped beside me. "Dad?" "Yes?" "Do you ever wish we'd taken Harrogate's money?" I looked at Margaret's photograph. Then around the lobby. The honest answer surprised me. Sometimes. Evan laughed. "Really? $21 million is still $21 million. He nodded. "I think about the job sometimes. The money? The quiet." I understood. Then I asked, "Do you regret rejecting it?" Evan thought. "No." "Why?" He looked toward the auditorium doors. "Because I finally made a decision about the Bellrose that did not require me to own what happened afterward." I put a hand on his shoulder. He lit me. "People sometimes ask me who saved the Bellrose. Years ago, I would have answered with a story about Margaret and me buying the building in 1989. Then I would have described the restoration, the fundraising, the reopening. I would have said my family saved it. Now I give a different answer. Nobody saved the Bellrose once. People have been saving it for almost 100 years. The people who built it. The people who bought tickets. The people who restored plaster. The employees who worked when payroll was uncertain. The city that provided money. My wife, who wrote a covenant because she knew her family too well. My daughter, who left when staying required her to become smaller. My son, who carried too much until carrying it began to feel like ownership. And eventually, me. Not because I held on. Because I finally let go. I spent most of my life believing legacy meant leaving something with your name attached to it. I was wrong. Sometimes legacy means building something strong enough that your name can disappear without taking the thing with it. The night of that first city hearing, my son tried to have me removed because he believed I was standing between the Bellrose and its survival. He was wrong to do it. He was wrong to use my age and ordinary forgetfulness against me. He was wrong to hide his deal. But underneath those wrong choices was a truth I had spent years refusing to see. I had been standing between the Bellrose and change for a very long time. Claire saw it first. Margaret understood it best. Evan learned it the hardest way. I learned it last. That does not make the lesson less true. The Bellrose Theatre is still standing. The stage is still there. The balcony is open. Children still rehearse in rooms upstairs. People still complain about parking. And the Calder family no longer owns any of it. For a long time, I would have described that as losing our theater. Today, I describe it differently. The theater finally stopped belonging to us. And because of that, it still belongs to everyone.